Coin throwers, a form of augury. We've been talking about Versipellis here. We've been talking about the werewolf. And there's a Mesoamerican werewolf. The were-jaguar is a more popular way of calling it that. The jaguar spirit is a animistic psyche that you can wear as a mask. And in fact, it's underneath you the whole time. When you are asking people that feel this kind of psychic thing that's happening to them, they say it's described as if their hair is a thick, woolly hair is on the inside of their skin, the inside. And so this concept of Versipellis, a word that means skin turner, is kind of right on. It's more accurate than you might think. Now, an ancient legend tells of a man sneaking a human boy into an animal sacrifice to Zeus on Mount Lycaon, And this ancient legend has been, we know where Mount Lycaon is, and a few years ago we dug up this picture you see is a body of a boy that's been placed in a sacrificial pit, and the sacrificial pit it doesn't have a head, and archaeologists believe this is very possibly one of these rituals. And the ritual, even though it's in Rome, it's very much the sacrificial, the death of something is causing something else to happen. And we can freeze frame it as religion and say it's a ritual because they worship Zeus, but none of that makes any practical sense, especially when you start to think about the mindset or the lack of mindset of what people were thinking back then. For you and I to say that ancient culture did this because it was a religious practice is really to misunderstand the word religion. And when you find out that religio was a word that wasn't even a word in our vernacular until like 300 BC, I think you really start to correct yourself. You realize religion isn't really the right word. If anything, this word is sort of socio-economic religion. It's everything that's built into food, clothing, shelter combined into a singular psychology. A singular psychology that's so simplistic, that's so primitive. Think about this. It's so primitive that it doesn't have the capacity to even think in terms of religion. Early human consciousness was less unified than it is today. Identity and restraint were not bound into a single continuous self, which allowed different modes of mind to take over the same body, psychologist Julian Jaynes. He's describing to you a beast of burden mentality, a persona, a self that is not even complex enough to have a trinity kind of a setup, but does in fact have a shadow self and a sun self. And that these two selves are not a complex psychology. They're actually a primitive consciousness that exists in each lobe. Your left brain and your right brain are two separate creatures. These two creatures are wrapped around this other creature. And this other creature is wrapped around this other creature. And that this triune lateral consciousness, this six-sided mindset, not really six-sided, more like the Trinity, but then the Trinity is learned fertility. The third one learns fertility, and it splits itself in two. Technically 4 personalities. But one of them is a Vitruvian, a combined being. 2 mindsets that are sometimes aware of each other and sometimes are not. So every single thing that you've ever heard coming from what you would think a Jungian perspective is exactly what James has brought to you in a psychology. It's the same template. And the voices that were interpreted by Jane as being God were the other lobe. He says the metaphere creates a metaphrand, a new entity that used to be the inexpressible. Keep in mind, the inexpressible is never tangible, it's never touchable, it's never knowable. You still don't know your other brain right now. You still do not know this other lobe. In fact, what's happened is one's become extuitive and one's become intuitive. One has become the master dominant one, and the other has taken on a more passive role. It's sort of like dancing, where now you have someone is going to lead. And one of the interesting characteristics about humankind is that we tend to have a tendency to be right-handed, and that this is a unique constraint laterally on us. And that I would argue that if James was alive and I could interview him now, he might agree when I tell him or when I ask him, don't you think that the left hand, right hand thing would cease to be a dominant right-handed thing if we started dancing in a way that did not have a lead, in a bilobal kind of consciousness? Now, I would guess that James would say, I don't think you could function that way. I mean, now, this is like Weekend at Bernie's. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop putting words in this dead guy's mouth. I don't know how he would see that. I think there's a strong advantage to having someone leading. It gives the ability who's not leading to kind of be a navigator, to look at the map, to give you advice when maybe you're too focused on steering. All of the systems that you have in your body, from digestion to breathing to heart to circulation to CSF flow to all of the rhythms, your lungs themselves require an agency, a department that runs separate from, fully conscious, but outside of your purview, outside of your consciousness. And this is something that a lot of us forget. Hence why I started with loneliness, is that consciousness is a much smaller part of our mental life than we are conscious of. Because we cannot be conscious of what we are not conscious of. The dark spots that you will never see the dark spots. You will never see the vagaries, because your conscious mind, the thing that is in front, aware of itself, it's so proud of itself because it's being aware of itself, doesn't see anything else at all, so there's no context for it to even be missed. It's a blindness that's easy. It's an easy kind of blindness, and I think we forget just how easy it is. For the Versipellis, the wolf, for the howling skin, is the metaphere in this case. It is this familiar animal, and this familiar animal is the closest thing that we can grab to describe this metaphrand, this terrifying loss of agency, this other lobe. When we have no other word, and we still have no word, we have to call it something. We have to call it something. And most of the people that go through this journey, this awareness, call it a wolf. In Mesoamerican culture, they would call it maybe a jaguar. Not always, but maybe. Let's see if you can hear this.
Mr. W. is a 37-year-old single male farmer from Appalachia. At the time of his service in the United States Navy, he had a normal average IQ. Since his discharge after 4 years of service, he has progressively and insidiously failed to function both as a farmer and in his daily activities. He has episodically behaved in a bizarre fashion, allowing his facial hair to grow, pretending that it was fur, sleeping in cemeteries and occasionally lying down on the highway in front of oncoming vehicles. There is also a history of patient howling at the moon. Following 2 of these occasions, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. On the first admission, he was given a diagnosis of psychosis and mental deficiency, and marked deterioration of higher cortical functions was noted. During his second hospitalization, he was diagnosed as suffering from chronic undifferentiated schizophrenia, based on his bizarre behavior, since discharge or hallucinations could not be elicited while he was in hospital. During his third hospitalization, 1 year after his second hospitalization, the patient explained his bizarre behavior by saying that he was transformed into a werewolf. The mental status examination showed a patient who was tidy yet dirty and sat in a slumped position. His facial expression was blank, and he showed paucity of motor activity. He did not display any concern about his hospitalization, and his affect was flat. His speech was slow, but in general logical and coherent, with impoverished thought processes. Although little rapport could be established, the patient was in general cooperative and compliant. On cognitive function testing, he showed markedly impaired attention and concentration. His ability to calculate was severely impaired, recent memory was moderately impaired, and remote memory was spotty. The ability to make objective judgments and abstract was reduced. On physical examination, soft neurological signs were found, including bilateral hyperreflexia of the triceps, a slow second phase of both knee jerks, and a thick speech with retarded flow. The remainder of the neurological examination was negative, and the family history was non-contributory and negative for neuropsychiatric problems. The patient's symptoms began after he was discharged from the Navy. The patient had a positive brain scan, static in the region of the right frontal cortex. Skull X-rays showed a lucid area in the right frontal region. The cerebral arteriogram did not show a mass lesion in the brain. The pneumoencephalogram showed no evidence of dilatation, but the third ventricle was somewhat atypical in appearance. No pathological changes could be identified. Psychological testing showed a mental age on the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test of 8 years 1 month and 10 years 5 months respectively, corresponding to an IQ score of 57 and 68. On the Shipley-Hartford scale, his vocabulary mental age was 11 years 9 months. His abstract mental age was 8 years 4 months, and his conceptual quotient was 70. There was a variation in the testing, and his verbal functioning level was at best in a mild retardation range with an IQ between 52 and 67. Considering his figure drawings in the Shipley-Hartford...
So I hope you guys could follow that. I've got another one if you can, because it's a female patient. It gets a little weird, but I still think it's interesting. That case of was diagnosed as schizophrenia, but also classifies under this lycanthropy. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that word today. 2 cases of this lycanthropy. This first one that you just heard, guy had enough of an IQ to enter the Navy, which some would argue doesn't require that high, but it's definitely functional. You're looking at probably 3 digits. I think he said he scored maybe in the 110 range. Has a psychotic movement into this wolf-like state and starts scoring with like 80 IQ. His psyche is, as we've said before, the amount of calories, the amount of resources it takes to hold a complex mind is something that the individual would wane through if they were having trouble. If you were waning through something like that, you would call that lunacy, because that's the definition of the word, a what you and I would call an insanity that ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. And that this movement was tracked politically because every month you'd have basically a March of Lupercalia. You would have every month you'd have some sort of debauchery, some sort of waney experimentation. Most of them violent, most of them pretty crude stuff. The one that I've read about recently involves the slaying of the sheep. The sheep is torn into shreds. The skins are worn as a girdle with nothing else. And you wear these skin girdles into town, and you beat people with the dead entrails of this animal, and that this is a fertility ritual. It's a fertility ritual. The psychology of what all these mean, it's today we have general buckets where we can say things are schizophrenic, but really schizophrenic would simply be a deterioration into the concrete, right? This is ultimately the definition of what schizophrenia is one who is so clinging to the concreteness of the meaning of every single word that they're unable to extrapolate, and they start to atrophy from the social interaction, from the, hey, do you see how fucking insane it is too? Yes, I see how fucking insane it is too. And that's an important diet that we have where we learn to drink from each other. So the Versipellis is showing you the exact same thing someone goes through when they suffer from a head injury. What's the first thing that goes? They drop their manners. They drop their politeness, get sometimes out and out violent. We see people coming out of states of anesthesia. I think you're looking at Versipellis in the modern day world. Most of your cops videos, high-speed chase, someone's pulled over after driving through a mall, breaking through a plate glass window, all kinds of crazy, insane stuff. You finally get him. You finally grab the guy, and he's asking, what did I do? What did I do? It's a psychic switch because there's a different agency that comes online, because that agency is a constant Zeus that ebbs and flows based on how much electricity it has to spare. This is the primary purpose of what the thalamus does. It's pulling this stuff back all the time. It's denying, it's asphyxiating all the other systems so it can preserve that warm-blooded existence that you and I call self. So no matter what we drink, no matter if we eat weird mushrooms, no matter if we have a bad day, no matter if we have a midlife crisis, that we can maintain a warm-bloodedness, a certain psyche, because society demands that we be consistent. So all the cases that you see of this lycanthropy are elemental states that should not be dismissed as schizophrenic, because we start to misunderstand the onion that makes up who we are, the psychology of who we are. And this stuff goes back to, it doesn't just have to go back to Rome. One of the beautiful things that happened when Cortez conquered what we call Mexico is that we're able to, for the first time, look at a culture 2,000 years closer than we've ever been able to see it before. And we burned most of that shit. We're like, hey, let's take all their books and burn them. Let's burn them all. And that's too bad, which is why I feel lonely, because I'm like, man, we burned all that shit. We burned all that stuff up. But the Nahual or the Nagal is a practitioner of magic who can transform into an animal, most commonly a jaguar, owl, or turkey. The belief is rooted in the idea of the tonal. This is the companion spirit. A powerful sorcerer doesn't just shapeshift. They turn their essence into the animal form to travel through the spirit world. 2,000 years ago, people understood this. 2,000 years ago, the Mexican culture said, yes, you have an anima. You better have an anima. It's your animal. We've gone from animal to animus and anima. And we knew that first. This is not a complex thing. This is a rudimentary thing. You're rudimentary. And not only that, every 20 days you were cycling through another spirit, another animal. This one down here on the bottom, not the cross, the one right beside it. This is Flint. And if you're trying to build a society that's built on the animalistic spirit of people, because they're mostly waning all the time, there's not an ego in line. What if every 20 days people shoved a flint, an arrowhead into their tongue? What if every 20 days we as a culture all bled together on this one day? It would put our psyches into a rhythm of some kind. And this rhythm would allow all of us to animalistically relate to each other, and it would be a sort of piggyback. Our egos would be gestating from the collective. And this is happening now. We just can't admit it. We're too close to it. That Epstein is in a way this flint, and that it's supposed to cut, it's supposed to feel a certain way because it keeps us limbically alive. We're limbically aware of the skull fuckers that are around us. And that you would move from reed into flower, into jaguar, into eagle, into all of these different facades, because you would need to constantly be reminding your neurology who the fuck you were. I am this person. I am this facade. I am wearing this mask. I am the skin turner. And the collection of all those things would be the mastery of all these different masks. The Balaam, and there's that word Baal, which just means Lord. But the Balaam, the jaguar, this is a king or a high priest, often called Balaam. The transition from human to jaguar was not seen as a physical deformity, but as a transcendence of the senses. Entheogens, anything, basically there's that word theos again we talk about, right? So anything that you put into your enteric system that makes you think about God would trigger an altered state of consciousness or a secret language, a Nahuatl, and the ecstatic trance. Nahuatl is the language of these people. The Aztecs are collectively largely known as the Nahuatl, and this word means clear language or clear communication. You're going to see how this word plays with itself. And buffalo toad skin, Bufo marinus, has 5-MeO-DMT, causes these trance, what was called flesh of the gods, teonanactol, psilocybin mushrooms, morning glory seeds, oleoiqui, containing LSA, a precursor to LSD. This wasn't invented by the CIA. This was reinvigorated by the CIA. Balchi, a fermented drink made from honey and the bark of the lycanthropy tree, fused with other psychotropics. This same thing would actually save a village from giants. So the animus, the anime, has always been a vital part of your subpsyche. There's this pose that you get in. You get down on your knees and you place your hands on your knees. Becoming a jaguar was a terrifying process. This transformative pose depicted jaguars. Their back straight, which represents a moment of shifting from human to feline, utilizing bloodletting and pain. They would engage in auto-sacrifice, stingray spines, obsidian blades to draw blood from ears, genitals, and tongues. The sleeplessness, the pain, the high that you get from natural bleeding breaks down this human ego. and allows this spirit to take over. And if you had pleomorphed into the jungle, if you believed in the jungle, if you had more faith in the jungle, you would find a spirit animal to relate to. You would notice that you too were a skin suit. And you would see Zippy-Totec in a completely different way. This skin-changing creature that we joke a lot about here, this guy that gets to wear the dead skin of someone for a week. This is Versipellis. He's exercising what it feels like to be inside the early mind. And we wear leather today, maybe not as much now, but we wear wool, we wear all kinds of different fabric that are made from animals. We relate to different parts of them in different ways. Our entire government has a spirit animal that's declared it illegal for you to possess the feathers of even today. It's illegal for you to be a skin turner and associate with the eagle. Unless you got papers that prove you're indigenous, you're not going to get away with this. This is why I'm telling you, you guys really should consider being indigenous. You earn the right to wear a jaguar pelt. You start to tap into all the things that it has, and jaguars are famous for their night vision. This is considered the first son of the Aztec. The first son is peripheral vision. The first son is how your peripheral vision works. You're seeing a brightness contrast, and it's not even a collection of what you see. It's more of a collection of what is moving around you. This is jaguar consciousness. It's a world where you're doing nothing but learning about trajectories, if you think about it. Hunting down trajectories, following smells, memorizing targets, storing neurological constellations that allow you to feed. Therefore, you're worshiping your own mind because the thalamus is rewarding you if you engage in activities that bring you close to those neurons that fire when you want to feed. And that this is your early God. You're listening to an early voice that you don't recognize as your own, telling you how to stay warm, telling you how to eat. When we say God forsaken me, it's because we tore down the veil. We started to notice, wait, this is my own lobe, and it lost all the magic. We lost all the magic from that. We're like, well, fuck. I liked the magic better when it wasn't coming from me. This is a huge lesson. This is a wound that is exactly what we need. It's a necessary wound that we need. You tap into this spirit animal and suddenly you feel like you can see at night. What if the reason why you developed night vision is because jaguar psychopaths practiced a long time ago? And that in order for you to change the way your eyes work actually requires a psychic kind of focus. A kind of muscle that is so primitive you don't know it's there. And this is why some people have better night vision, some people have worse night vision. Some people suffer from what we call night blindness. And that all these things more come about from our lack of pleomorphicity. Our lack of ability to remain pleomorphic in that way. The Inuit had this Kiviok, this sealskin spirit. It's a skin parka. Of course, these guys are, mastering what it's like to sleep in the super cold. They've been tapping into this skin turner for a while. But there's the same worry is there, where if you do not emerge as a person, if you do not return to your ego self, you will lose this ability forever. Pliny the Elder says, when a man hangs his clothes on an oak tree and swims across a lake to become a wolf, the Inuit would hide these skins. No one could step inside of a skin that they had occupied too. It's more of an anchor than we realize. It's more important. So all of these things are happening, and most of these things we're aware of through Roman history, but they were happening here too. And I think the thing that stops us the most is just kind of how tricky it is to pronounce these words. But if we could learn to pronounce them, if we could learn to have discussions about this culture, as I've said before, you've got like a 2,000 year lens. You're closer to it than you've been. It hasn't been washed in such a way to where you can still see some big clues. One of the biggest clues is the Sibyl. We've discussed the Sibyl. This is the female werewolf. She would live in a cave, broadcast what's happening. These Sibyls became so important that the Vestal Virgins were born out of them. The sanctity of Rome itself, the success of Rome itself, was based on the success or the virginity of the Sibyl. An oracle, someone who is the dangerous ability to prophesize, and yet this dangerous ability is attempted to be cloistered. It takes almost as long as 300 AD, I think, before it's fully even cloistered. And one of the prophecies that came maybe 20 years, maybe 10 years before Cortez was even known came from the book of Chilam Balam. There's that jaguar word again. Of Chumael. And basically, I want you to picture a female, an oracle, a corn thrower, someone who, instead of counting birds, they count kernel seeds. They're doing exactly the same thing. They're functioning in exactly the same way. A village is run around this matriarchal Sibyl. She has the ability to end a marriage, to send people to war. Her prophecy is everything. And right before Cortez came, one of these ladies said, "The chiefs of the town shall be seized because they are lacking in understanding. A great tragedy is about to unfold. History will never be the same." And then Cortez hits, and people are just like, holy shit. This is why we have Sibyls. This is why we will not accept a society that doesn't run off these things. And every village seemed to have had a navel around it, a central omphalos that kept the psychology together. And that navel was nagualism. It was this ability for someone or something, the village itself, to transmit or transmute into an animal. And that this was really at the center of what your society was. Nahuatl is so deeply ingrained with the Sibyl that Nahualism and Nahuatl, one means clear speech, one means the other self. That the root of Nahuatl and the etymology of the word, this other self, this other skin beneath you, are built off the same word. One means clear, one means hidden. The clearness and the hidden occupy the same definition. And the only other place where I've noticed this was in Africa. I was blown away to discover that Zuru, this idea of white or clear, is also considered a ghost or an anti-life, the inability to hide from oneself. The albino is cursed because they have no shadow. And this early psychic knowledge that you were part man, part beast, if you don't even accept bicameralism, you're seeing an early agency theory of how the self comes online, where there are certain agencies. And ultimately, the Zeus that wins, the self that you call you, is the agency that has more control over all the systems that it can consciously. I'm talking about the frontal conscious executive agency self, because the real self is so much lower than this, so much more on a rudimentary level. that your consciousness isn't even able to poke it with a stick. So this is all upper executive function stuff, which comes online and goes all the time. You lose executive function every day, I hope. I hope you do. I hope that happens to you. And it would be very difficult to become conscious of that unless you have enough calories to remember to thoth your way through these scapes, through these nagalistic journeys where you shapeshift into all these different things. The only way you're going to conquer Mexico is you're going to have to get rid of the shapeshifters. In 1530, the historian Haraber recorded the contract to the jaguar. The practitioner would go to an isolated spot, typically do some bloodletting out of their tongue or ears. They fall into a deep sleep. In this state, the shadow animal would appear and say, "On such a day, go hunting, and the first animal you see will be my form, and I shall remain your companion." This is the guardian pact ritual. This is how you find your spirit animal. So you're hearing a voice of your animal before you're able to see it. You hear its voice before you can see it. And I think that this really best captures the difference between the metaphere, the metaphie, and the metaphrand. That we only understand our internal world through metaphor, and that the metaphor is only effective when it has something that we can physically point to, that we can physically touch. An animal, something that is universally known as a symbol. This is why Gaia is training you. You're living in a training ground, a simulation, a hallucination, doesn't matter what you call it, but you're living in a training ground where the animals are training you. The birds are teaching you to speak. The jaguar's teaching you to survive. The rabbit's teaching you to run. The flint's teaching you to bleed. All of these things, the reed is teaching you to record. The sacred reed is teaching you to record, to remember, to store. All of these things are compacts with your brain to insist that you remember who the fuck you are. And the only way you're going to take over a nation like Mexico that has a 2,000-year zoom is you're going to have to get rid of these psychic contracts. And that's hard to do. You got to kill a lot of people. Nagualism became a crime. The Spanish Inquisition really hit its heights in Mexico. Martin Ocelot, that name literally means jaguar, was one of these victims. The Spanish truly believed he was an elite Nagal sorcerer. This guy, Bishop Juan de Zumarragua, the first inquisitor of Mexico in 1536, convicted him, prosecuted Ocelot, not just for individual sorcery, but as a dangerous political and religious leader. These guys that were jaguar transformers, they were well-to-do. They were successful businessmen. Keep in mind, this is the Omphalos of the village. You're gonna be the patriarch. So you got to remove the patriarchs, and the patriarchs are considered patriarchal because their spirit animal has convinced the village that they should be. And so people were proud to say, "Oh, I've seen Ocelotto transform into a jaguar. I've seen him doing that." And this very pride that you have became the very persecution that would occur. And Ocelotto was actually baptized as a Christian in 1525. It didn't matter, though. He's a wealthy merchant. He was encouraging the people to reject Spanish goods, to prepare for a coming apocalypse. He saw it too. And this guy was so dangerous that they couldn't kill him on the soil. They had to put him in a ship, and they had to send him over to Spain. They were going to punish him there. And the ship sank. And people in Mexico found out that the ship sank, and they believed in him even more. It got worse. And the persecutions got worse, which made the belief worse, which made the were-jaguar the most hunted animal in the 16th century. Another victim, Don Carlos Chichimecatecoatl, of Texcoco, the first indigenous nobleman to be executed at the stake. They did this in the town square. He's a rebel intellectual, grandson of the famous poet king Nezahualcóyotl, and a highly ranking lord. Highly educated, baptized, lived as a Spanish gentleman. Still, he was arrested for doubting the Spanish and for he was accused of being a were-jaguar. And these guys were, during his trial, witness claimed Don Carlos possessed a secret room filled with ancient things, idols, and ritual items used to communicate with the Naguals. To the Spanish, his clear speech, that's the word for Nahuatl, masked a predatory heart, Nahuali. By killing him, they hoped to decapitate the underground network of jaguar priests. He was entrained to the land. He was tied to the spirit of the land, and that had to be cut off. He had to become a white guy. He had to be crackerized. The removal of his roots from the land makes him docile and makes him think, well, do I have a right to protest here? Well, do I have a right to protest here? The slaughter continued, 1560s, Bishop Diego de Landa. To the Spanish, there was no such thing as a spirit companion. They reclassified nagualism as a satanic pact, of course, Satan. They argued that the priests weren't actually turning into jaguars, but the demons were creating the illusion of a jaguar to deceive the senses. This is why you saw Satan be invented. You needed a universal catch-all. You needed a legion to unite, to have all capacities to satisfy any kind of dogma except for the Spanish or except for whichever dogma you're trying to install. You know, we've talked a lot about witch pricking here. I've put forth that if you look at the history of vaccines, you go through this really bumpy ride where you hit witch pricking, seriously, where there's a point where people are starting to think that the way that contagion works is through witchcraft, and that the very first needle, the very first inoculation needle was a witch pricker, and that they were doing the exact same thing in Mexican culture. If you were trying to conquer a village, you would find the nearest predator to that village you find, hunt it, kill it, slaughter it, bring it into the village. The way that you slaughtered it, you would then go to the village, you would get a sense of who was in charge, and you would say, you have a freckle on your paw. So too does this jaguar have a spot on its paw too. You're guilty. That's all it took. That's just how witchcraft works. Exact same thing. So you have this constant, what was happening with witches? Remember what King James, the demonology, says? Thou shalt not use any sort of belief in your healing. If you if you say something to make someone feel better, you must touch them with moss or some sort of pumice or poultice or something. Because if you try and insist that you have the power to heal, you will be smitten, which is how are you going to rule people that think they have the power to heal? How are you going to rule people that think they are possessed by the power of a jaguar? You have to stop those things. The physical sensation of shifting, this is recorded in a 1690 treaty, recorded the testimonials where practiced, describing an internal feeling of becoming a predator. The double skin feeling. Confessors described a sensation of their human skin becoming a casing or mask. There's that word, nawali. That felt tight and itchy before bursting to reveal the fur beneath. The way of the spirit, they reported a sudden heavy density in their limbs. That's interesting to me. It shows a somatic breach. If you think about how heady you are, Imagine if you were to sink into your body, the first thing that would happen is your body would feel dense. It would feel heavy. It would feel heavy because you're there. You're sitting deep in your body, so you're there, right? So feeling their human muscles condense in the powerful coil power of the feline. Priests confessed that their human vision would dim or go black, replaced by a sharp silvery light. This is exactly how your peripheral vision works. Isn't it fascinating that there are people that don't know the phrase peripheral vision or describing peripheral vision? It took us a while to realize that. When I was a kid, peripheral vision was black and white optical vision. That's how everyone understood it. And that's not how it works at all. It doesn't work that way at all. In 1624, the famous Pablo case, one of the most documented confessions comes from an Otomi man named Pablo in the Sierra Metzlian. A jaguar had entered the community at night and was beaten back with sticks and stones before vanishing. A few days later, Pablo returned to his village covered in deep bruises, exactly where the villagers had struck the jaguar. Before he died from his injuries, he confessed that he was the tiger, colonial term for jaguar, and that he had used the form to kill 4 people. He described the transition as a disappearance, leaving his human self behind to wear the beast, feeling every blow the jaguar received as it were happening to his human skin. Some of you may want to dismiss this and say, well, that's all bullshit. And I don't need you to buy or reject anything, but I do want you to know that psychopathic jaguar priests were around a long time before the Spanish were there. Believe it or not, psychopathic jaguar nagalists were the only sense of justice that you had inside your village. Why do you think that the nagalist was at the center of the village? This is a primitive form of this phrase that we know from Native American culture called snakes in hair. The earliest government structures that you've ever found are umphalically based, meaning the center of the world is based around the person with the most snakes in their hair. The person who is the most cunning, the most evil, the most derogatory, the most despised becomes the center of a village. This is how piracy works. This is how monarchy works. This is how Trump fucking works. This is how Mossad works. This is how Israel works. This is how every large conglomerate is centered around some sort of evil piece of shit. And that it's actually not as unnatural as you think. You're witnessing predator because predator is the one that you deem the most dangerous. We do not recognize how much of our witness is a kind of worship. And until we do, we will keep worshiping predator. The answer, I think, is it doesn't even matter. You're not going to be able to take your gravity eyes off of the center of the most dangerous thing, the thing that threatens you the most. You are, but you're going to have to be so Lemurian that you just don't care what happens to you. And you're just not ready for that. You're entrained into the world. You're not, this isn't a Theravada Buddhism class. It's not gonna work here. You could do that, and more power to you. But until then, you're sunk in the flavor of the corn dog with me. We're here. One of these Sibyls who foresaw what was happening is still celebrated today, although she's kind of been forgotten. Maria de la Candelaria, Textile Maya woman, who her father was a nagalist, and she foresaw what was happening with the Spanish, and she was pretty much right every time. She said that her vision came and said, hang on a second. I'm running late, aren't I? Okay, cool. Yeah, she said that her vision came and the vision, hang on a second. I have a vision of a church being built, excuse me. And the Spanish said, well, you can't build a church there. Huge revolt, lots of war, huge revolt happened after that. This has been a 200, 300, 400 year campaign battling over this second self. Here's the tonal, your daylight self, your social identity. The Egyptians would call this the Ba. We've discussed that. In the world of nagualism, you aren't just one person. Every human is born with two distinct soul forces, the tonal and the nagual. Priests lived in the tension between the two. Most people in modern day America only see themselves as one, that the shadow self isn't even recognized. And this was going to be your predator. It's going to be your predator. And if we don't see the predator in you, you're probably going to have to see it in some large figure, some sort of unfollow, some sort of ultra predator, whether it be Bill Gates or Epstein or Trump or whoever else, that you're going to need a pole. You're going to need this sort of other part of you to understand. And these are the same word. Nahuatl is the voice of the sun. Nawali is the mask of the jaguar. Clarity and mystery combined is who you are. It's both those things. All right. I'm going to, we got a dojo. You should come to dojo. I hope people are still there. I'm sorry. I'm way over. I did not mean to get all preachy at the beginning, but, man, skullfuckers. What are you going to do? Right. Hope you enjoyed the show. Feel free to join us, inside of Patreon. We can discuss more like this, other things like that, and articles and things like that. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.